Hi, Daniel. Well, today you're 30 years old. Back in Fort Worth, Texas, 1988, at 11:46 a.m. on August 29th, I gave birth to you. And that was the day that our family became complete. That was the day that my life changed. That was the day that Ariana's life changed, Nicholas's life changed, and your father's life changed. And you've brought much joy to all of us. So don't ever doubt that. But I wanted to send you this video so that you would know about the day that you were born 30 years ago. So back in 1988, we had moved to Fort Worth. We moved to Fort Worth in 1986 when your dad was finishing his education at UTSA. He graduated with his mechanical engineering degree from UTSA in 1986, and we moved to Fort Worth in June of 1986, the same month that Nicholas was born. Nicholas was born on June the 7th, and we moved on June the 14th. So yes, 7 days later, we were in Fort Worth. And we lived there, and we bought a house, and we lived at 2608 Meadow Ridge Drive in southwest Fort Worth, Texas. And we had our neighbors, and we had our best friends, Annette and Frank Garcia, who lived in Euless, Texas, which was about 45 minutes north of where we lived. So we lived in southwest Fort Worth, and they lived north of Fort Worth in Euless. So we were very, very, very good friends with them. We would see them every weekend. And every weekend, they would drive to our house. Sometimes they would spend the night. Sometimes they wouldn't. Or we would drive to their house. But it was easier for them to come to our house because we had Ariana and Nicholas, and, I was pregnant. So back at that time, we had spent so many weekends with them, just barbecuing and playing games and talking, and we just never got tired of each other. We were always together. They loved Ariana and Nicholas. And Annette is the warmest, loveliest girl, and she loved all three of you. But before you were born, it was just those two, and she absolutely adored them. And so, of course, we loved spending time with them. And, your dad went to high school, went to Central Catholic with Frank, and then he went to UTSA with Frank. And they went through a lot together. And Uncle Frank was there when Ariana was born and when Nicholas was born. And, of course, he moved to Fort Worth when we moved, and he was there when you were born. So we were very, very good friends with them. And we had planned that when I went into labor, they would drive down from Euless to Fort Worth and stay in the house with Ariana and Nicholas so that we wouldn't have to take them to the hospital with us. So the plan was they were going to drive down at whatever time I went into labor, and they would either, just depending on how it worked out, the circumstances worked out, they would take Ariana and Nicholas home to our house and keep them until I was able to give birth, and your father was able to go and pick them up. So on that day, we were very routine and regimented. I had a very strict schedule for the kids, and I put everybody to bed, and your father and I went to bed at maybe about 10 or 10:30, and maybe about 12:30 or 1, I woke up with a very strong contraction. So 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning was a huge contraction. And it woke me up, and I sat up, or waited to see if I got another one, laid back down, and sure enough, 10 minutes later, another one came. And they became very timely, and every 10 minutes I was getting another strong contraction, but they weren't increasing in intensity, and they weren't increasing in the frequency. So I started walking around, and I checked on Nicholas and checked on Audie, and then walked around to the front and looked outside the front window and was trying to figure out what I needed to do, because the two previous births were so different. With Adiana, my bag burst and I knew I had to go to the hospital. With Nicholas, I had him induced, so it was planned and I knew exactly what to do. But with you, it was the other way. So it was a natural, completely natural, waiting for you to come, waiting for you to arrive in your own time. So the contractions started at 1 o'clock, and sure enough, every 10 minutes they were coming very strong and very frequent, timely. And so maybe about 2:30 or 3, I got up and I thought, I'm going to take a shower and get dressed and wash my hair and shave my legs and put on my makeup so that I don't go to the hospital looking like death. So I thought, I'm going to get up. So I got up. I took a shower. I washed my hair. I blow dried it. I put on my makeup. And I didn't really get dressed. I just put my pajamas on and went back to bed to try to relax because the contractions were not increasing. So maybe about 4:30, they got really, really strong, and they did start to increase. So we called Uncle Frank and Antoinette and told them that it was time, and they said, okay, bye. So they hung up and they drove over to our place, and they got there maybe about 5:30. So we made sure everybody knew what the plan was. Audie and Nick were still asleep, and your father and I drove to Southwest Hospital, Harris Southwest Hospital in Fort Worth, Texas, and we got there maybe about 5:30. They placed me in my birthing room because back then, I think that was maybe the beginning of how they do the birthing suites now. So you labor in one room, and then they convert it to your birthing suite, and then they convert it to your hospital room afterwards. So you were labored, birthed, and stayed in my room, in the same room when I went to the hospital. So I got there around 6-ish, or they got me into a room around 6 a.m. And I just, they kept checking me and saying, yeah, they're coming, they're not increasing, you're not as dilated as we thought you were. And so they just kept checking me. And maybe around 8 o'clock, they came in and they said, we're going to start this Pitocin so it'll help to increase your labor and hasten it. So that way I won't have to wait. So so they gave me an epidural to numb me because knowing that the birth was imminent and it was going to be coming and it was going to be pretty strong, and I had lived through Audie's without any anesthetic whatsoever. And with Nicholas, he was planned. His birth was planned, so we had the epidural started, and then the Pitocin, and then they progressed his birth. So with you, they started the epidural, and I kept telling them, or started telling them, I'm numb on one side, but I can still feel the contractions on the other side. So one half of my body couldn't feel it, the other half of my body I could feel it. Not fun. But I was telling them I could still feel it. They were arguing with me and saying I couldn't. But either way, contractions started coming once they increased the Pitocin. Contractions started coming more frequent and stronger in intensity, and your father was sitting at the bedside reading the newspaper and knowing that the contractions, I had a fetal monitor on my belly, and the contractions were coming, and they had the monitor, and you could watch the blip of the contraction, and then it would continue going on. So your father was sitting there with his legs crossed, kicked back, reading the newspaper, and he'd peer over his newspaper and say, oh, wow, that was a big one. And then he'd go back to reading. So I was there and kept feeling the contractions on one half of my body. And the intensity became stronger and stronger until they finally said, okay, it's time. You're dilated. You need to start pushing. So I was able to push and push. We started, when they started all the Pitocin and the anesthetic and all that, it was about 8 o'clock. So maybe, so it was a relatively short labor because you were born at 11:46 a.m. on August the 29th of 1988 in Harris Methodist Southwest Hospital, and the doctor was Dr. Charles Myers, and you were absolutely gorgeous when they got you out. Um, they pulled you out, and the first thing I noticed was that you looked exactly like my father, and that is why you're named Daniel George Martinez. You looked exactly like my father, and my father's was the most loving, patient, docile, sweet, gentle man that I think ever walked the face of the earth. He was beautiful and sweet and loving, and he was just everything that I hoped my boys would be. So um, it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see your face, and it was beautiful to hold you and to wrap you up and cuddle you and just admire. I just admired your face, and I was just so in love with you, just looking at how beautiful you were. And I just was so happy that you looked like my dad, and you looked like my dad, and you looked like his mother. So my grandma, his mother was Delfina Navarro Gonzalez, but you looked just like them, and I was very happy with that. And later that afternoon or that evening, Uncle Frank and Antoinette brought Adiana and Nicholas to the hospital room, and they came in, and Adiana was just holding your little hands like this, and she was just so in love with you. She was just so sweet, and you were still trying to gain focus and look around, and I guess acclimate to your surroundings, and you were just a little bundle of happiness and love and joy for all of us. You completed our family, Daniel, and we're very glad you did. We've had a beautiful 30 years, and we had a few turbulent years back in your 20s, but we made it. We made it together, you and I. And I love you. I'm very proud of you. Don't ever think that I'm not, because I always have been. Even when you were struggling, I knew you were trying, and I'm glad for that. So I hope you enjoy your day, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day again.